What was the first impulse for you to become interested in the European history?
European history was interesting to me because of the Cold War. So I'm of the last generation of people who grew up in the Cold War. And in the 1980s, as I was a student, Europe was present because Europe was divided. I then had the wonderful good fortune that while I was at university in the late 1980s, Europe changed, and it was the revolutions of 1989, and before that, some of the dissidents who attracted me to Eastern Europe. And it's been my great good fortune to be able to become a European historian, starting from Eastern Europe.
It's a pity. My opinion is common people in the United States know very little about European history as well. So maybe your works should be the way how to explain American people to part of history which they know nothing about that.
Well, so it's maybe not as bad as you think. I mean, America's a big country, and there are a lot of people who read a lot of books about European history. It's true that the perspective is usually a British or a French or sometimes a German perspective.
Yeah.
And that only in the last 15 years or so have there been big books which took Eastern Europe into account at all. So Tony Judd's Post-War was the first synthetic history of Europe, which actually managed to integrate the Eastern European experiences. And I think it's true that my books have played a certain role in shifting the perspective eastward.
Okay. I had prepared some questions for you, but last 2 days was very special. On Thursday, when I came home, I opened the internet and I have seen Nice, 48 casualties. Yesterday I came home, I opened the internet, and I have seen an attempt of coup d'etat in Turkey. I think history did some big steps now. What do you think about that issues?
Well, here's what I think. I think you should stop opening the internet. No, so I have a serious point to make, which is because of the internet, we can sometimes get jerked from one story to the next. So Brexit, right? Nice, Turkey. And I think it's very important for all of us just to stay calm and to try to see patterns and to pay attention to the good things that remain and the solid things that remain in Europe. I have no special knowledge nor any special expertise about terrorism or about coup d'état. My inclination in both cases is to think, well, terrorism in the case of France or in the case of Britain or the United States or Belgium is going to keep happening, and the question is how we react to it, right? So let's just assume that it's going to be there. We shouldn't be so surprised the next time. It's horribly sad when dozens of people are killed for no reason, but it's also important how the other tens or hundreds of millions of people process this. It's going to happen again. How do we process it? Do we process it in terms of separating ourselves from the rest of the world? Do we process it in terms of thinking about how we cooperate to prevent things like this from happening again? With Turkey, I have really nothing, I'm afraid, interesting to say. We don't know who did it. We don't know why.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be days or weeks before we have any clear notion of this. The general point I would make is that any Turkish government is going to be under stress because Turkey is the route of migrants from the Middle East into Europe. The Europeans want that migration to stop. Turkey is intervening in Syria partly in order to stop the migration. Turkey itself is the target of massive terrorist attacks, which we've almost forgotten now. So there's a deeper process here which involves the destabilization of North Africa and the Middle East, and that in turn has to do with climate, something completely non-political. And so in the very, very long term, if Europeans want to get on top of this issue of migration and political destabilization, there's an ecological side to this. One has to do something about climate.
So we will see.
Yeah.
You pursue the Second World War subject matter in broader connections. In your opinion, is there a moment or a point in the pre-war events when you would say that war was no longer possible to prevent?
Well, in the case of the Second World War, there was a very unusual situation in that the leader of a major European country, Adolf Hitler, wanted war. So I think war was something close to inevitable. Where there was a choice was what war to fight. So, for example, the war that if Czechoslovakia had chosen to fight in 1938, that would have been a different war, right? I think Czechoslovakia would have done fairly well in that war, and probably the Second World War as we know it would not then have happened. The way it did happen was that Germany found an ally in the Soviet Union. The two of them invaded Poland together. That was one of the worst possible ways for the Second World War to begin, I think. So no, I would say pretty much from the time Hitler came to power, it was very likely that there was going to be a war, and the question was what kind of war and against what kind of coalition.
Okay. Recently, I read some paper. The author has some theory that Stalin was only months before invasion in Europe. What do you think about that?
I don't think that's true. I mean, This is a kind of minor debate in the field of Soviet history. I'm simply not convinced by this. I don't see any evidence for this. And there's what one sees when one looks at the Soviet occupation in the new territories incorporated by the Soviet Union, 39 and 40, is an attempt to bind them to integrate them into the Soviet system. You don't see an all-out militarization. You see an attempt to bind these places into the Soviet system. You're doing a lot of things which are actually destabilizing in the short term because you think you're going to be integrating them in the long term into the Soviet Union. So I don't actually think that's true, and I think in a way it distracts attention from the real issue, which is all of the quite terrifying and extreme changes which happened in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Eastern Poland between 1939 and 1941.
As a historian, when you compare events and an indication that preceded the Second World War to recent events in Europe, do you perceive any resemblances in the comparison, or do you see it differently?
I mean, history never repeats itself, but with history can help us to see certain patterns. And one pattern I would point out, especially here in Central Europe, is that isolated, small nation states are not particularly tenable, right? And so, the history of 1938 to 1941 is not just the history of Munich. It's the history of Anschluss, Munich, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the destruction of statehood in this whole part of Europe. So the relevant lesson of that for today is one needs some larger entity to help protect statehood.
Okay. It's summer. I would like to ask you, how do you spend your free time? Can you rest? What is your holiday like?
Yesterday I had an hour to myself, and I ironed my shirts.
Oh yeah,
and that's about as much fun as I ever had.
Okay. We are almost in the middle of holidays here in Czech Republic. How do you usually part with your students at the end of the semester? Do you have any customary sentence, saying, or quote?
No, because my lectures are always from notes, and so it's always different. And I mean, my main lecture course is about the history of Eastern Europe from the year 1000 to the present, and so I end in the spring with the present, but the present's always different. The students in general know very little, but by the end they know rather a lot, and many of them find Eastern Europe very interesting. Then they come and visit Prague, or they come and visit, or Kiev, or they visit someplace in this realm, and that I find very heartening.
Always remember, please, Prague is not Czech Republic.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm sitting in the back of a dark car in Ostrava, so it's hard for me to forget. And I'm very happy to be in Ostrava, by the way. This is a really amazing festival. But all I'm saying is that for my students, it's the first place that they're going to go is going to be a big city.
Our company is a bookshop, or book distribution. So, we would like to know what is your best book ever, and which book do you have considered interesting recently?
So you're putting me in a tough spot because I don't know what's on your shelves or what you translate. So I don't know if I'm going to give the right answer. So let me just think of something interesting that I've read.
Last 6 months, for example.
Last 6 months, something interesting that I've read in the last 6 months. I read a lot. See, the thing is, I read a lot of really bad history books, because that's my professional
Well,
that's my professional responsibility. I reread Shakespeare, but see, that doesn't really count.
Great.
Right?
Great.
I reread Macbeth. You know.
Yeah. Good choice.
These are the
Good
things.
choice.
These are the things that I read. You know.
The Melting Pot Forum is part of the Colors of Ostrava open air festival. So, do you have any favorite band here, or are you interested in pop music?
Yeah. No. So this is. I mean, that's kind of wonderful for me. Like I looked at the program. Like there's the Programa Mapa, which has everything on one page, and like there was like of Monsters and Men was on one side, and there's like Timothy Snyder on the other side. Okay, this is wonderful. This is the only time I'm ever going to be on the same playbill as of Monsters and Men. Yeah. No. There's. I mean, I'm a fan of them, and you have some really good acts here. It's a very serious music festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Snyder, thank you very much for this short interview. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for doing what you do.